The arena lights burned bright over the ring as the next contest on the card prepared to unfold. A lightweight clash, scheduled for 8 rounds, though the energy in the building suggested something far more significant was about to happen. On one side stood the elegant technician from France, Sofiane Oumiha, a man whose reputation had been forged across the world's greatest amateur stages. On the other side waited a hardened professional from Mexico, Edivaldo Ortega Castro, a veteran with more than 30 victories and years of experience inside the unforgiving ropes. The contrast between them was clear even before the opening bell. Oumiha carried the quiet confidence of a world-class craftsman, a 3-time world champion in amateur boxing, and a 2-time Olympic silver medalist who had come painfully close to Olympic gold. Ortega, meanwhile, represented the long road of Mexican prize fighting, hundreds of rounds, countless gyms, and a career built on durability, grit, and persistence. The crowd buzzed with curiosity. Would the polished brilliance of Oumiha shine once again, or could the seasoned Mexican veteran disrupt the rhythm and create an upset? As the fighters stepped into the ring, the tension thickened like storm clouds gathering overhead. Oumiha, dressed in white, moved with relaxed confidence, his shoulders loose, his eyes calm. Ortega, clad in black, stood tall and composed, his posture that of a man who had been here many times before. The referee delivered the final instructions, reminding them of the rules, the expectations, and the responsibility that comes with stepping into the squared circle. When they touched gloves, it was more than a gesture of respect. It was the final moment of calm before the storm. In just seconds, skill, endurance, and willpower would collide under the bright lights, and the story of this fight would begin to write itself. When the opening bell rang, Oumiha wasted no time establishing the tone of the contest. Known for his fluid movement and sharp ring intelligence, the Frenchman immediately began to dictate distance. His lead hand flicked outward like a probing instrument, measuring range, touching Ortega's gloves, and subtly disrupting the Mexican's rhythm. Oumiha had always been a master of control, not through brute force, but through timing and precision. Ortega, aware of the challenge before him, started cautiously. The Mexican fighter had faced undefeated opponents before, and knew the danger of rushing forward recklessly against a technician. Instead, he watched carefully, looking for a moment to close the gap. But Oumiha was already settling into his familiar rhythm. A quick right hand to the body snapped into Ortega's midsection, drawing a dull thud that echoed through the arena. The Frenchman's footwork kept him on the outside, circling smoothly, forcing Ortega to reset again and again. Whenever the Mexican attempted to step in, Oumiha's lead hand interrupted him, sometimes as a jab, sometimes as a mere touch, but always enough to keep him off balance. As the first round moved toward its closing seconds, the pattern had already begun to form. Oumiha was controlling the geography of the ring, gliding across the canvas with effortless ease, while Ortega struggled to bridge the distance. The Mexican wasn't in serious trouble, but he was being carefully outmaneuvered. When the bell rang to end the opening round, the crowd murmured with appreciation. They had witnessed the beginning of a chess match, and early on it was clear that the Frenchman was moving the pieces exactly where he wanted them. Round 2 unfolded with a similar rhythm, but now Oumiha began to show flashes of something more dangerous beneath his calm exterior. His style had always been deceptively relaxed, almost languid, as if he were conserving energy, while quietly studying every movement of his opponent. But suddenly, between those light touches and probing jabs, he would explode with a sharp, authoritative punch. Midway through the round, that moment came. Oumiha lightly tapped Ortega's glove with his left hand, a harmless gesture on the surface. Then in a split second, he snapped a powerful right hand straight down the middle. The punch cracked against Ortega's guard with surprising force, drawing a ripple of reaction from the crowd. It was a reminder that Oumiha's calm demeanor hid real power and precision. Ortega remained composed, staying compact behind his guard, but the problem was slowly becoming clear. Even when the Mexican wasn't being hurt, he was losing the exchanges. Oumiha's body shots landed with sharp thuds, each one designed not just to score points, but to chip away at Ortega's stamina over time. The Frenchman's rhythm was difficult to disrupt. He tapped, feinted, shifted his feet, and then suddenly fired combinations with perfect timing. Ortega needed to change the pace, to force the fight into a more chaotic battle, where experience and toughness could matter more than technical finesse. Yet every time he tried to close in, Oumiha slid away, or intercepted him with a quick counter. As the bell sounded at the end of round 2, the story was beginning to take shape. Ortega remained competitive and determined, but Oumiha was steadily building a lead, round by round, like a patient architect constructing a victory. By the third round, the dynamic of the fight had become unmistakable. Oumiha's style had a hypnotic quality to it, a rhythm that could lull opponents into fighting at his pace, rather than their own. He didn't always appear busy, but the punches he landed were precise and meaningful. Ortega, meanwhile, was facing the classic dilemma of fighting a superior technician. He wasn't being overwhelmed, but he was being outmaneuvered in almost every exchange. Early in the round, Oumiha stepped in with a crisp right hand followed by a left to the body, driving Ortega briefly back toward the ropes. The Frenchman's feet moved quickly, cutting off the ring just enough to maintain pressure without overcommitting. Ortega fired back with determination, trying to assert himself, but Oumiha's defensive awareness kept him largely untouched. Every so often the Mexican did manage to land a respectable punch, reminding the crowd that he was still very much in the fight. Yet the Frenchman's combinations were sharper and more consistent. As the round entered its final minute, Oumiha increased the tempo slightly, putting together a flurry of punches that forced Ortega to retreat. The crowd responded with applause, recognizing the artistry on display. When the bell rang again, the pattern was undeniable. Oumiha was winning the rounds through pure skill and composure, while Ortega continued searching for a way to disrupt the flow. The middle rounds revealed the true contrast between the two fighters. Ortega began pressing forward more aggressively, attempting to force exchanges on the inside, where the fight might become more physical. For brief moments, this strategy created opportunities. The Mexican landed a solid body shot, and tried to follow it up with pressure along the ropes. But Oumiha's adaptability quickly neutralized the attack. The Frenchman shifted his stance momentarily, switching angles and circling away, before launching a quick counter combination. One particularly sharp right hand snapped Ortega's head back slightly, a reminder that even a small defensive lapse could be punished. Still, Ortega's toughness was undeniable. Many fighters would have been discouraged by the mounting deficit, yet the Mexican veteran kept advancing, refusing to abandon his mission. The crowd began to appreciate his resilience as much as Oumiha's skill. Meanwhile, the Frenchman continued to vary his attacks, mixing body shots with quick uppercuts and well-timed hooks. His lead hand remained the key to everything, touching, distracting, and setting up the heavier punches that followed. By the end of the fifth round, the scorecards were almost certainly leaning heavily in Oumiha's favor. But the fight itself remained compelling, because Ortega's determination ensured that every exchange carried the potential for drama. As the bout moved into the later rounds, Oumiha's dominance became even more pronounced. The Frenchman was now dictating not only distance, but also tempo, choosing exactly when to attack and when to reset. His jab flicked out repeatedly, sometimes pushing Ortega backward, sometimes disguising the right hand that followed. Ortega continued to press forward, but the effort was becoming increasingly difficult. Each attempt to close the distance was met with precise counters that chipped away at his energy. Yet the Mexican's resilience remained extraordinary. Even as his nose began to bleed and his face showed signs of swelling, he refused to wilt. Oumiha, sensing the widening gap in skill, occasionally stepped closer to engage at mid-range, unleashing combinations that echoed through the arena. Still, Ortega absorbed the punishment and kept moving forward. The crowd, recognizing the bravery of the underdog, responded with growing admiration. This was no longer simply a contest of skill. It had become a display of heart against precision, toughness against technique. Entering the final rounds, Oumiha faced a subtle decision. He was clearly ahead on the scorecards, but the possibility of a stoppage still lingered if he chose to increase the pressure. For the first time in the fight, the Frenchman began to step on the gas. In the ninth round, he drove Ortega back with a sustained barrage to the body, each punch landing with heavy intent. A right hand slammed into the pit of the Mexican's stomach, followed by a sharp left upstairs. For a moment, it appeared as though the pressure might finally break Ortega's resistance. But the veteran refused to crumble. He covered up, absorbed the storm, and fought his way back to open space. Oumiha continued firing combinations, testing the limits of Ortega's durability, but the Mexican's willpower held firm. The crowd erupted with cheers, recognizing the sheer grit on display. Even under relentless pressure, Ortega remained standing, determined to reach the final bell. The 10th and final round arrived with a sense of inevitability. Oumiha remained in complete control, calmly working behind his jab while occasionally digging into the body with deliberate force. Ortega, though clearly battered and fatigued, continued fighting with pride. Every punch he threw carried the weight of determination, a statement that he would not surrender easily. The Frenchman, perhaps recognizing the veteran's courage, maintained his disciplined approach, rather than chasing a reckless knockout. Still, he continued landing clean shots, each one reinforcing the story of the fight. As the final seconds ticked away, both men exchanged one last sequence of punches before stepping back. When the bell finally rang, the fighters shared a respectful touch of gloves, a quiet acknowledgement of the battle they had just endured. When the judges' scorecards were announced, the result came as no surprise. Sofiane Oumiha had delivered a masterclass in control, precision, and ring intelligence, winning the bout comfortably on points. Yet the story of the fight was not only about dominance, it was also about resilience, the refusal of Edivaldo Ortega Castro to fold under pressure. For Oumiha, the victory reinforced his status as one of the most technically gifted fighters in the lightweight division. A man whose Olympic pedigree and elite skill set continue to shine in the professional ranks. For Ortega, the night served as proof of his toughness and professionalism, a reminder that heart can be just as memorable as victory. And as the lights dimmed over the ring and the crowd applauded both warriors, the fight left behind a lasting impression, a story of brilliance meeting bravery under the unforgiving spotlight of the boxing world.